Good morning and welcome to another episode of Stand Up for Jehovah. First of all, a quick apology. I'm so sorry about the quality of my videos. I know the poor. I didn't think much was going to come of this. I will attempt to correct this by buying something better. This morning, I'd like to talk to you about the governing body, or the Octopope, as a friend of mine on Facebook calls them. When I was a kid, I knew nothing about the governing body or the Octopope. Indeed, it wasn't Octo back then, was it? It was probably Decapope or Duodecapope or even Octodecapope. It really didn't matter, despite the fact that they told us how to live every single detail of our life, from which way to put our vests on, to which way to scrub a carrot, to whether we could have brown sugar or white sugar in our tea. We quite happily accepted this mysterious body of men's edicts. But now I've done some research and I've got interested. I was going to read you out the names of the Octopope, but I actually lost the will to live just reading the names out. So instead, I'm going to discuss some things to note. The first thing to note is we've got 8 men here living together at Bethel, a bit like the 7 dwarves, I imagine, only with one more dwarf. It was the 7 dwarves up until 2012, and then there was a surprising new addition, more of which I will discuss later. On the 2nd of October 1999, 4 of these men were appointed to the Octopope. That tells me some heavy shit must have gone down in 1999. And actually, if we'd been alert, we would have realised that a prophecy had been given out by the artist formerly known as Prince, who wrote a song called 1999. You will be amazed when I read out the details of this prophecy. Let me just start here. I was dreaming when I wrote this. Well, that is clearly a prophecy, just like the Apostle Paul and the other prophets who had visions. I was dreaming when I wrote this, forgive me if it goes astray, but when I woke up this morning, could have sworn it was Judgment Day. Prince really seems to know what he's talking about here. He's talking about a time of the end when God's going to come and judge the peoples. Next paragraph. The sky was all people, there were purple, there were people running everywhere, trying to run from the destruction. Does that not remind you of one of the illustrations in the magazines about Armageddon? You know, I didn't even care. Well, that is clearly the attitude of the governing body, isn't it? It makes you wonder if Symbol, the artist formerly known as Prince, is actually on the writing committee of the governing body. It continues. So I was dreaming when I wrote this, so sue me if I go too fast. Well, clearly a prophecy. What's been happening recently is that the governing body are being sued left, right and centre and are having to pay out to the tune of millions and millions of dollars for the various court cases that they're either keeping quiet or settling. But life's just a party and parties weren't meant to last, says Prince. Let me tell you something. Well, that's not how I'd express it, Symbol, artist formerly known as Prince. It's quite poor English. Anyway, let me tell ya something. If you didn't come to the party, don't bother knocking on my door. I think that Symbol, the artist formerly known as Prince, is clearly making an allusion to the apostates who fall away from the way of the truth and stop going out on field service. This prophecy is uncanny and clearly points to the 2nd of October 1999 when 4 members of the governing body were appointed. Now, just to put this in context, there are other minor prophets that could be said to contradict Prince's prophecy. The great Jarvis Cocker of Pulp did put out a song, a prophecy, that said, let's all meet up in the year 2000, clearly indicating that not everyone would have been destroyed in 1999, which indeed they weren't, were they? But the governing body doesn't have any trouble with reconciling dates that haven't happened. They've had a lot of practice. Anyway, moving on, what else have I noticed about the Decapope? Well, they are surprisingly diverse. I always imagined that it was just a bunch of old men, or dwarves if you like, living together in a very large and opulent house. But no, they're not all white Americans who are greatly aged. One of them is foreign. In fact, he's so foreign, most of us can barely pronounce his surname. That is clear evidence of diversity. One of them is an Afro-American, still American, but Afro, that's good. 3 of them are married. 3 of them, brothers and sisters, at least 3 of them have had sex. 1 of them has had belly fruit and raised them in the ways of Jehovah. So when they're putting out all these magazines telling us every single detail of our lives, how to have sex, who to have sex with, what to do with your children, how hard to thrash them, how high to jump, these men know what they're talking about. 1 of them has had children. Now, another really interesting thing to note was that in 2012 there was a surprising late addition to the governing body. And this was Mark Sanderson. Mark Sanderson is a freakishly young man, aged 47. Indeed, before they appointed Mark, the average age of the governing body was no, not 90, but it would have been good, wouldn't it, fit the song. The average age was 70. But when Mark was appointed, he knocked a staggering 3 years off that and brought down the average age to 67. They're almost as young as us. Now, I have visions of Mark Sanderson having to be like the T-boy, the photocopy kid, dressed up like Angus Young in AC/DC with his long grey shorts on, running round and doing all the menial jobs and having to still write in pencil, not being allowed to use a pen yet. I'd like to think that that's how they're treating him, because I don't really want to imagine that somebody so young is going to be given any great responsibility. However, when old Marky Boy joined, he must have thought he'd hit the jackpot, because he joined at the same time that the new light came out that said there were only 8 members of the faithful and discreet slave now, the governing body. The other faithful and discreet slave, all those thousands of them, they could all fuck off. They weren't needed at all. No, just this small group of diverse and interesting men were now the faithful and discreet slave and had been appointed over everything on heaven and on earth. Fantastic. I did get a bit kind of maudlin when I was looking at the names of the governing body, because none of these names were familiar to me. Hurd, Jackson, can't pronounce it, Morris, Pierce. What happened to the old names, the names that we'd grown to know and love? Swindle, Henchman, Schrodinger's cat. He was the member of the governing body that came up with the doctrine that you could simultaneously be a Jehovah's Witness and not a Jehovah's Witness. Even if you'd sent in a letter of disassociation, you were still a Jehovah's Witness and could be punished by them. What about the other old names that we'd grown to know and love? Barber, Barber Papa. It's just not the same anymore, is it? It's like watching tennis without the old names playing. But anyway, here's my final thought about the governing body. A couple of them are really old. I mean, they're all pretty old, apart from Mark in his Angus Young long grey shorts. But the rest of them are pretty old. But 2 of them are quite old, 79 and 80. Now that is longer than a generation, isn't it, gents? You know it. You've had quite a good innings, and despite the fact that you've never had to lift a finger in your life to do any work, and you've had everything done for you, your cooking, your cleaning, your travel arrangements, and so you might live longer than normal, I think that does indicate that there will shortly be 2 top spots, 2 God spots, if you like, 2 spots on the governing body for ambitious young bucks who are trying to climb the greasy ladder. And so here's my advice to those young bucks who are trying to climb that pole and get into one of the God spots. One of the common features that all of these men had was that they started pioneering really young, 17, 18, 19 years of age. They nearly all special pioneered, they were nearly all circuit overseers, and then they managed to move to Brooklyn Bethel. That's the key. You've got to get yourself in at Brooklyn. They're moving, aren't they? It's going to be a beautiful place. It looks like Centre Parks to me. If you can book a week out of the school holiday season for, say, £2,000 or £3,000 at Brooklyn Bethel, get yourself in, get known, get your face seen around, I think you could be a shoo-in for the next Jesus replacement. Good luck, brothers. And thank you for listening to another episode of Stand Up for Jehovah.